All right, we're away. We're recording. Fantastic. Good morning. It's Susie from Lewis Gallery, and today I am so super excited because I get to have a chat with a lady I met early last year. We did a residency together over on Gari that is commonly known as Fraser Island, and she's a person who really just struck me. She's just an amazing personality and a super talented artist. This is Erin Dunne, and welcome, Erin. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick introduction to who you are, where you're from, what your art's about.
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, it was a real pleasure to meet you on that particular exchange over on Gary. That was a great time. So my name's Erin Dunne, and I'm an artist and arts educator who's living and working in Rockhampton, which is on Durrumble country. The crux of my practice really is about an autobiographical examination of place, and in particular regional places. And previously a lot of my work has been based around drawing and works on paper, but that's currently kind of expanding, so it's not as useful anymore to say that I'm somebody who draws, but that has been something that's been a really big part of my practice in the last few years, is drawing and mark making.
Yeah, and we've been watching your practice get more and more exciting over the past couple of years. Because since we met, I've been following you on Facebook, and I've been seeing you work with some really big institutions delivering interesting programs, and your art has been travelling around Queensland as well with Flying Arts. You've won some fantastic awards. Give us a little bit of a insight. What's been probably the highlight of the past couple of years with these big projects you've been rolling out?
That's kind of a tough question because they've all been so different, and each of them has had something that's been excellent. Of course, each has been accompanied by particular challenges as well. I think probably one of the highlights has been my solo exhibition house that was held at Rockhampton Art Gallery in 2019. That the thing that was really exciting about that was working with Rockhampton Art Gallery to produce a show that invited interactivity, that was supposed to be really accessible for a very broad range of audiences, and then receiving all of that really lovely feedback from people who'd gone to the show and participated and said that, that's the first time I've been to the gallery, or, I took my kids to the gallery and we had this lovely day together. I took my grandma to the gallery and we had a great time. So I think, that show, making that show, but then also the feedback that came from that show was definitely a big highlight in the past few years, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big thing to work with the regional gallery, and Rockhampton has just been doing great things. You guys have got an amazing director up there with Bianca. How did your project come about? Because it's not always an easy thing for an artist to just walk into a regional gallery and say, hey, I'd love to have an exhibition. What was the process in getting that show up and rolling for you?
There's like a short answer and there's a long answer. I'll give you the short answer first. Bianca invited me to have the show, the director that you mentioned. She's been a real game changer for the Central Queensland community in general, but specifically the local arts communities. And then the long answer is that when I moved back to Rocky to start teaching in 2015, I'm a qualified secondary visual art teacher, although I'm not teaching full-time anymore. I was. I made it a goal of mine to get to know the people working at Rockhampton Art Gallery, because even though I was working full-time as a teacher, I knew that eventually I wanted to work full-time as an artist. And so I knew that that couldn't happen without being surrounded by some sort of creative community. So I made it a point to get to know the people working at the gallery simply by turning up to shows, talking to the volunteers who work on the desks. And I probably looked a bit weird, actually. You probably didn't see this very often, but I would take my sketchbook and just sit and draw in a show for hours, and they'd be watching me from the front desk of the security camera going, what's that person doing in there? And they'd get curious, and then they'd ask you, and then you could say, oh, I'm an artist or whatever. And so I guess through turning up to openings and going to shows and paying attention to what was in front of me, I got to know them all really well. And then I think that's really how I got the show, was turning up, meeting people get to know your practice. And then that's probably 2015, 2016, I had a little tiny solo show with Rocky Art Gallery called Love Letters to Central Queensland. That was the first show in a newly kind of open space called the Maryland Light Gallery, which was named for a very generous member of the board of trustees. And that probably started to demonstrate ability and commitment. And then I think there were other things like winning the 2018 Queensland Regional Art Awards, which Bianca was a judge in, that really demonstrated an ability to work on a large scale. And I think that was probably the final thing that clinched that invitation to have that show. But so it's like how did I get the show? Years and years of preparation, but also it was just one invitation. So there's kind of two answers, I suppose.
It is. But it's not, because what I hear from you is that you were visible, you were consistent, you were determined, and that and if your art community doesn't know that you're there and you're making art, it's like, how does the invitation come your way? So I guess if we take that then a step beyond that, if we go backwards, it goes, what is the mindset that plays out for you that goes, I'm going to be visible? Because a lot of artists that we find can come in and they can be scared to even say that they're an artist, for one, let alone that they want something from a gallery. So what is the mindset that plays out for you? What kind of self-talk gets you to that point where you go, I'm going to go and be visible? Is it just centered around the fact someday I really want this career? Or is it something that you foster beyond your art career? It's a big question, hey?
I was going to say, that's a massive question. How long do you have, Susie? No. So what is the self-talk like? What is the inner dialogue?
Yeah. How do you breed the confidence that says, I'm going to go make myself visible to a regional art gallery?
Oh, fake it till you make it. No, it's honestly, it's a combination of a few different things. I don't really know if I can identify what the self-talk is because it's not really happening consciously and overtly. It's happening subconsciously. But I think probably it's like when I was at art school, I was really, really lucky. And we had this, I won't name her, but we had this extremely established Australian artist who's like represented Australia at the Venice Biennale. So that will give you an indication of the caliber of that artist who came and spoke to us. And she talked about, and I think we probably not trying to liken myself to this artist, but I think we had a similar trajectory immediately after we left art school. We both finished art school and went, oh, the last thing I want to do right now is be an artist. So we went and got jobs in the real world. And one of the things she said was that it'll nag at you. It'll come back to you. And that is how that you'll know that you're meant to be an artist. It's like, when you stand on a prickle in the grass or whatever and you can keep walking because you've got to turn the sprinkler on or whatever, but you're still there. It's like this itch that nags and nags and nags. And I was teaching full time and I absolutely adore teaching. I loved my students. I loved my colleagues. I loved the school. I want never to give the impression that I quit teaching because I didn't love it to become an artist. That's like, couldn't be further from the truth. For me, they're absolutely, it's a symbiosis. Yeah. And so I taught and it just nagged and nagged and nagged to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. So that's probably the closest I can get to explaining what the self-talk is for how do you get the confidence. I wouldn't probably describe it as confidence. I would describe it as like an itch that I had to scratch. And so I knew that if I wanted to show work, I would have to meet people. And so it wasn't, well, it's not like, it's not this like bravado, God, I feel fantastic, I'm going to call the director that I don't have a relationship with and try and get the show. Like it's never like that. It's like what is around me in my immediate surroundings that can help me reach my goal, which is to scratch this itch of wanting to really immerse myself in a full-time arts practice. That's the motivation. I don't know. Does that answer the question?
I understand it intimately because I can reflect that journey back at you. I did the same thing. It's like when I got out of art college, I was like, how do I get into the industry? What did I do? I went to my regional gallery and I volunteered and I learned what to do from the people who were already doing that. And I guess art's one of those funny careers, isn't it, where you get out of college, but there's no employment line that you stand in that goes, now here's what you do to get to the next step to share what you've learned. So I think, what I'm hearing from you is a very similar feeling that I had. It was just like, how do I get into the industry? It's go and sit with the industry and find out how other people have done that. Speaking of this itch to be an artist, it's something that It doesn't go away, does it? So have you been creating artwork? And I know you from knowing you personally beyond this, is that you've come from a very regional, rural setting. How did art making go for you as a young person that this itch continued into your adulthood, in your career? How was art making for you as a younger person?
Glorious. Like it's that I'm sure we all view our own childhood through these rose-colored lenses and whatnot, but it really just, in my memory of it, it was just this extended playtime, you know, for that 5 years before you start school, where because my mum is a visual artist and she's like one of my, you know, all-time heroes, favorite, best artists, best everything, best mentor, best thing, you know, she's just incredible. And so she was my mum, which is amazing. So we had, you know, open studio on her, access to all her, she let us use her good paints, her good canvases, all her art books that were just always there. And it was just so normal to, you know, see her making work. Like, I'm the oldest of 6, so I have, you know, distinct recollections of my younger siblings being born and things like that. And, you know, the youngest couple or whatever would go down for a nap in the middle of the day, and mum would be straight to the paints or straight to the pastels or whatever she was working on. So it was just never not in front of me. And I think if you talk to like a great sports person, or you talk to, I don't know, a great chef, or anybody who's getting some traction in their domain, the field that they work in, they'll probably tell you that they were immersed in it as a child, or they had somebody who was really supportive of them in their pursuit of that as a child. So yeah, I think it was just because it was fun. I just loved it. It was fun. It was a shared interest between mum and I, and then between, you know, my siblings and I. And I think mum being naturally biased towards the visual when she taught me, because I was homeschooled because we were too far away from a school for a number of years until we could get stuff done. I'm sure that was something she lent on heavily as a way of helping me to learn. So yeah, it was just like this layers and layers and layers of, you're in it all the time, surrounded by it constantly, you love it, you're receiving verbal feedback and praise and affirmation from people that you love and admire, that you're doing good things. And I think all of that just kind of, you know, ferments and becomes part of your identity. And so that's where the itch comes from, I think. Yeah. But I want to emphasize fundamentally that it's because I love it. Yeah. That's why I would not be doing what I was doing, you know, with all of the slings and arrows and all of the stresses or whatever that come from trying to make it as a freelancer. You know, the only reason that I can wear those stresses and frustrations is because I fundamentally love it.
Yeah, I get that on a base level. You have to, at the very core of who you are, you really have to love this career. You have to love creating, and you have to be, there's a grit that comes with standing with something that you've made from your heart and your soul, and you're sharing it with other people. And talking of slings and arrows, that is another question into, because you do in this career. Like, I'm yet to meet an artist who hasn't come up against that criticism of, my 3-year-old can do better than that, or some kind of criticism that you have to fight not to take personally and fall back on. Like, I fall back on 2 things. It's one is the self-belief and how much I love it, and 2 is my support network. Have you come across some big obstacles in your career that, you know, like there are pivotal moments that could have made you turn away, but you've had some kind of a process that you got through, whether it was people or fundamentally how you felt about your process, that got you through the tough times?
I don't know if I could say that there's ever been one single obstacle, but there have certainly been confluences of factors in certain circumstances that have made it harder to have that self-belief or that commitment. I have to say, I have been extremely fortunate in that I have a family who can support me financially if something goes wrong. I have been very fortunate to have had good physical health throughout my life, and to, for the most part, have had pretty stable mental health. There's certainly been periods where I've struggled with that, as most people struggle with that at some point in their life. So I want to acknowledge that too, that I'm in this bizarre, lucky position where I haven't had those sorts of obstacles put in my way, because they're very real obstacles. So I want to sort of say that, you know, I'm speaking from a place of just the sheer luck of not having had to surmount that those kinds of obstacles, and I can't imagine what that is like. And I'm sure that you've got other artists that you can speak to who can, you know, explain how they navigate those situations. So I can only really speak from my incredibly lucky place here. But probably some of the obstacles have been things like when you grow up in a regional area, and I'm not sort of counting my immediate family in this because my mum is an artist, but when you grow up in a regional area, there tends to be, not always, but there tends to be the unspoken sort of sentiment surrounding you that the arts are dispensable and that they are not productively contributing to, you know, a gross domestic product or our economy and things like that. And therefore, because they don't carry that obvious financial return, the other returns that they carry are not significant. Like if you can't measure it in dollars, perhaps it's not worth measuring. And so I think probably that this is very hard to identify when and where that belief starts to kind of suffuse your own belief system. But I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles I've had to clear in my mind is how do I turn to my community and turn to my family and face them and say that the decision that I've made to follow my art practice full time is not self-indulgent and doesn't, you know, like as a teacher, the service that you provide to people is far more obvious than any service that you might provide as an artist. So I would say that is probably one of the, that's a cognitive hurdle, that's a mental hurdle really, not a physical barrier. That has been one of the most difficult things to overcome, and I still struggle with it after, 2020? It's almost 10 years since I finished my art degree, and I still struggle with that, and I suspect that I might also struggle with that. But I think what happens is, like we talked about previously, that nagging feeling, something is going to win out eventually. You'll be able to put up with the nagging until you can't put up with it anymore, and then when you decide I'm just going to be an artist, it's because you have no other choice. So I guess that's how I've surmounted that obstacle. Is it just I went and did teaching, I worked as a teacher, I provided that service to the community, and I was remunerated for it. And in a way, I was preparing myself with a financial safety net that if something went wrong while I was practicing as a full-time artist, I could always go back to teaching. So, yeah, I don't know, does that answer that question? Yeah, that's probably the biggest obstacle, is feeling like it's a valid career path.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I get it. I get that on so many levels. You know, I grew up similarly in going, my mum was very arty, but my dad was military, and it was like, they couldn't be really poles apart. So art was kind of considered the fun thing to do that I did because it made me feel good. But what are you really going to do as a career? And then that nag was what persisted in going, you really want to make art, you really want to communicate. Can you find your way into a place where you feel financially sound to be able to do that? And I guess that brings on kind of the next idea, is that seeing yourself as a business person in the arts versus just someone who likes to create is a whole different mindset to that idea of art is just a hobby. So when you set up your practice, well, I know personally I set it up with a couple of different financial pillars. Is that something similar that you've done when you do your teaching? Are you doing other sorts of teaching around the arts, or do you have other sort of pillars around your art practice that make it more viable?
I'm probably a funny one. I don't know, because I feel like my situation is quite unique in the way that I support my practice financially. So I don't. Not to go into too much personal, but ideas around setting up financial pillars is interesting. Yeah, no, that's fine. I enjoy talking about this because this was probably one of the most difficult things to research and find information on when I was trying to make this transition to working as a full-time artist. How do people structure this? It's very easy to access information about how to improve your craft and, you know, things like that. But so I'm happy to talk about this with a degree of vagueness to, you know, protect personal circumstances and whatnot.
Yeah, thank you.
So, I mean, that's okay. Technically speaking, I am a business because I'm registered as a sole trader and I have an ABN, which has become essential over the past few years because of grant applications and things like that, which we can talk a bit more about later. I think you've got another question about it.
Yeah.
But I never became an artist with the intention of my work paying for itself. So and that probably sounds crazy from a business perspective, but I don't expect my work to pay for itself. And at this point in time, I don't foresee a time when that will happen. I expect my work to nourish me personally, and that's it.
Yeah.
So if it wins a prize, that's cool. If it gets to tour in a show, that's even better. But the crux of the practice is about having the time and the space to make work, which for me is a process of reflecting on and distilling what's most important to me in my life at that particular time. So for me, it's actually got nothing to do with money. So this probably comes back to what I was saying previously about feeling a bit indulgent. I'm not trying to make a product at all that sells. I'm trying to buy time and space and the means to go through these processes of reflection and processing and creating. So that's why I maintain my work as a casual relief teacher, and I find that is ideal for me. I have a very good relationship with the school that I work with. They're extremely flexible and very willing to allow me to say, no thanks, I'm out for the next 3 months because I've got a show coming up in January, but I'll see you next year for term 2 when I need some work again. I couldn't be doing what I'm doing without that amazing relationship with my school. And the teaching full-time for 3 years before I moved to my art practice allowed me to internalize, what it is to be a good teacher. And it allows me to kind of breeze in at 8, class starts at 8:30, breeze out at 3, and then that's it. I've earned my money, and then that can sustain me for another few days or a week or whatever. So that's really, so I'm probably unusual in that regard. There's no need for my work to pay for itself. I put far more money into buying materials and paying rent for my studio and the books behind me, all these sorts of things. You know what I mean? Like, that's where the money goes. It's not about selling. And if I never sell a work and never make $1 off it, it doesn't matter. And it will never be money wasted. It is, because it's an investment in me.
Yeah. Do you know what? I think it's such an important conversation to have, that if you're getting into art and your only focus is that you're going to make pictures and they're going to make your $1 million, that's the rare few that are, that are actually living off the sale of artwork. And it's far more realistic for artists to say that I do need to have these other pillars of support around my practice. And as much as your art making is a business, you've got to really sit down and look at it and go, where is the income coming from and where is the income coming to? You do have to put that business hat on. And as much as your income is coming from teaching, you're still going, here's how I'm allocating money to my business to keep it all working. And you really do have to have such a practical head on your shoulders when you decide, I'm going to do art as my full time. It's going to be my focus, and I'm going to tell stories that get out to the world. And grant funding is another way that we can bolster our practices. And regional artists, like, how have you found it up in Rocky? I know down here on the Fraser Coast, we have some access to some amazing grant funding because we're regional, and it gets us having access to great programs that come from, great institutions in the city, and we're working with great organisations that are reaching out across Queensland. How are you guys finding it up in Rocky? Do you have great access to grant funding up there?
I have nothing else to compare it to, because Central Queensland is the only place that I've lived regionally, other than where I am now. I lived in Southeast Queensland, but I was studying then, so I wasn't really accessing grants and things like that. So it's all I know. But to me, it seems excellent. I've had the opportunity to do things like travel to Sydney, to establish a mentorship that I still am a participant in, that has been sort of invaluable in helping to map my career progression and providing feedback and providing answers for questions that I can't find answers to anywhere else. I've had the opportunity to participate in workshops locally with artists and artist educators, of a national standing, and that is invaluable because it's very expensive and time consuming and energy consuming to have to travel the PD. That said, I do it, without a second thought. I'll spend the money if I've got the time. If I don't have a commitment, I travel pre-COVID, I should say, travel extensively, will travel interstate to, if I know that there's a strategic opportunity there to do a workshop with somebody that I want to get to know because they're at a level that I aspire to. I have no qualms about spending that money. Things like that. And then there's funding that I've been able to access to help me create new work for exhibitions. So the funding local that we mostly have access to is Regional Arts Development Fund. And then we also have access to the Regional Arts Fund, which is administered by Flying Arts. But I've also received Arts Queensland funding before, quite early in my career. That enabled me to do a residency in a high school, and that was probably the experience that allowed me to discover that I really love teaching and propelled me towards that particular aspect of my practice as an arts educator. So from my point of view, I've been very lucky and very fortunate with the grants that I've been able to access locally. I hope that COVID doesn't change things too much. I can already see that some of the funding that we have access to is less than it was the previous financial year, and I don't know for sure, but I assume that it's as a result of budgets tightening in response to COVID. And I have probably applied for almost a dozen grants this year and probably gotten one or maybe two, which is like, based on previous averages, that's a lot of grants that I've applied for that have come up unsuccessful. I think we're facing a situation where it's going to become more competitive, at least in the next few years, while governments and political bodies and funding bodies wrestle with ways of responding to the sort of unprecedented financial situation that we find ourselves in. But for the most part, I think we're very lucky in regional areas that people do see it as a necessity to allocate funding for us to acknowledge the barriers that we face because of geography and other factors.
Yeah. Oh, look, for sure. I'm the same. Like I've applied for more grants this year with less success than I've ever had, and even rounds of funding that they're only open for 45 minutes. And you're lucky to get your application in. It's been just a really different year as far as that goes. But I would completely echo what you're saying, is that my practice would not be where it is without knowing how to access grant funding. And I think it's really important to share this information with other artists. And as things settle, hopefully we get back into more routine around that. But it's a great thing to know. And what I found super interesting about what you were just saying then is you accessed grant funding to work with a mentor, which is fascinating. So the mentor that you've worked with, how much influence has that had on moving you forward?
It's hard to, quantify specifically how much influence it's had, but I can say just holistically that it's been invaluable. And I think it's operating kind of on a dual level. There's the underlying sort of sense of confidence and the security blanket, knowing that regardless of what crops up in your career, what issues you might face as you progress, there's always somebody you can call. I mean, I save my questions up. I don't bug my mentor. This person is very busy, and so I'm respectful in that regard. And then there's the assistance that actually comes out of the answers to those questions and the opportunity to talk to somebody who's many steps ahead of you on the path that you're, not a few steps, many steps ahead of you on the path that you're also trying to tread. I just think that's something that is fundamentally important to me as an artist, is surrounding yourself with good models, aspirational exemplars, and trying to find as much information as you can about how to get where you want to go. I just think don't sit at home not knowing, get out there and find the information, and whether that's through a mentorship or through reading or listening to podcasts or watching YouTube or whatever, you've got to access that information. Otherwise you just won't know, so you won't go anywhere. So I think the mentorship has been invaluable.
Yeah. Oh, look, I could not agree more. And again, it's one of the things I really want to dig into, is the kinds of things that you feed yourself to keep moving forward, because it's a difficult career with no set path. It doesn't go step here, step there, step the next place. And I had a mentor too when I first started, and I agree with you, that idea that I don't want to ring you every 5 seconds with a question, but when I really strike a problem, that there's somebody who's been there before me who might have been in that same situation and can go, well, this is what I did, this is what I got out of it. How does that unpack for you? And just give you some kind of clarity on an industry that can be such a mystery. So for me, I agree that knowing that there's someone you can contact, like finding yourself a mentor, is super important. But also the idea that you go out and find, there's so much information available through books and podcasts and, you know, the information that's out there to fill your mindset with. So I heard you say that that's something that you find important too.
Fundamentally,
what things do you read and listen to?
Classic teacher. I've prepared a few examples. Can I show you?
Yeah, please do. I love that. I love seeing how we get this mindset to really be in this career.
Yeah, sure. So I read all sorts of things, and you can only see a small snippet of my bookcase behind me, but the bookcase is full. There's books everywhere, and I also read a lot of fiction, which is not in this bookcase. It's in the fiction bookcase, which is in my bedroom. So yeah. I've pulled a few examples off the shelf. Yeah, they're probably are they a mirror image? That's okay. This particular book is the book that sparked my 2016 exhibition at Rocky Art Gallery. So it's just a book full of exquisite charcoal drawings by an artist named Peter Kingston. And so I saw the book and I just went, oh my God, why haven't I drawn Rocky like this? So I'm always looking at the work of other artists.
Yes, yep.
And this little book here, William Robinson, is one of my favourite artists of all time. He's Queensland based. He's worked as an art teacher for a long time. He comes from a rural background, makes work about rural and regional things too. So there's a lot I relate to in his practice. And this beautiful book called A New Perspective by Nick Earls is a bit of an exploration of his life. It's not so much about the work itself, but about his life. And so reading something like that allows you to internalize a model for how to live a creative life. So these sorts of artist biographies, I read those all the time. These are amazing. Fun Employed by Justin Hazelwood. How to Think Like a Great Graphic Designer by Debbie Millman. And this one, Twyla Tharp, The Creative Habit. These sorts of books are all of the when I'm feeling like I lack purpose, or I'm not hitting the goals that I'm setting for myself, or that I'm I don't know, I think your energy ebbs and flows, that when I'm in a rut maybe for creative energy, or a rut in terms of like my commitment to my practice, those are the how-to manuals, for fixing the nuts and bolts of that stuff. So they've got specific examples in them, particularly this one by Justin Hazelwood, because this is written for creative people in an Australian context. I can't recommend that enough for
Fun
people.
Employed.
It's kind of like you get yourself a mentor without having to get off the couch. Like, you can just read this and you've found a model of somebody who's done it all before you. This is fantastic. Another one in that list that I haven't got because I've given it to a friend is Creativity by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's definitely not how you pronounce it. It's this fabulous Hungarian humdinger name, but I'll find it and I'll put it in a link below your video. And that is probably one of the single most important books that I've ever read as an artist, because it is a decades-long study of creativity. And I can't recommend that enough. And then there's other things like art journals that I subscribe to. And then on a weekly basis, I read the Weekend Australians. I buy the paper just for the review. I read the review. At the moment, it's a bit skinny, I think, because of COVID. But prior to that, that was my way of keeping abreast of all of the developments that are happening across all of the different spheres of the art world in Australia weekly without having to leave Central Queensland. So
That's
I'm
amazing.
Constantly reading. I start every day by reading, especially if I'm going into the studio. I wake up first thing, have 2 cups of tea, a piece of toast, and I read while I'm doing that because it wakes my brain up, and then I go straight into the studio and start work.
Start creating. And I think that's what's super about what you're saying is, like, Rockhampton it's quite a distance from it. Like, it's a massive drive to the next capital city, and it's even from that distance, you fully have your finger on the pulse of what the art industry is doing. And in the the day and age that we live in, the joys of the internet, and, you know, you're getting the Australian and you're going, what is happening? And that's such an important thing to do. So I wonder from there, like, are you setting yourself, like, do you set goals, or do you have a practice of strategizing from, you understand what the pulse of the industry is, and then you start to strategize of where you might like to take your work in your career? Is there a goal setting process that you move through, or is it just oh, I'd like to do that?
No, there's both. There's like multiple levels of the layers of this kind of career, the architecture of this career framework that I've constructed for myself. And that's something I've constructed with consultation and advice from other people, like my mentor, like other informal mentors. They're not officially my mentors, but they're friends in the industry who work, you know, I've got some writers, some curators, some directors, and then artists whose work I really admire that I can discuss these things with. So there's like the long-term, mid-term, short-term, and then there's a set of goals that underpin all of that are not negotiable regardless of what the opportunity is. And that also those goals, they're kind of like core values. They help me decide what I'll say yes and no to, because when you start to get some momentum in your career, it's amazing. You'll be inundated with offers for your time and assistance. And do you want to enter this competition? Do you want to speak at our thing? Do you want to help the kids do this thing at our school or whatever? And you've got to have some framework for deciding whether or not you can spare that time. Because like I was saying earlier, earning that money outside of my practice is not about can I make art, it's can I buy the time to make the art? Can I buy the energy to make the art? So that's a resource that's more important than money. Money won't make art, time and energy make art. So you've got to decide how you're going to allocate those things. So I have that set of goals, and then that will determine both on a micro and macro level what kinds of opportunities I'll go for. So there's like, you know, big shows that I want to have entered in the next 10 years. You know, everybody wants to be in the Archibald or the Solomon or the Wing. I would love to be in the Dobell Drawing Prize, you know, at some stage in the next, let's say, 10 years. It doesn't matter if it doesn't happen, but it's an important kind of thing to have on the horizon to help you steer towards where you want to be. And then there's like a schedule that I have as well for which competitions come up at which time of year so that I can have work ready. And then there's also things like noticing opportunities that are unusual, like one-off opportunities such that I've just illustrated a children's book for the State Library of Queensland's First 5 Forever project. That's all I can say about the project because there's nothing else has been announced yet. But that was an unusual. Thank you. That was an unusual one-off opportunity, and I had to cut some other shows that I had planned on being in and some competitions that I had already scheduled to make work for. So I had to cut things to make room for that. So there's a schedule, there's core values, there's big overarching goals, and then there's like medium goals as well. Like what am I going to have completed by the end of the year? Yeah. I've forgotten what the question was. Was that the question? Yeah, goal?
That was exactly what I was asking, is like, do you strategize with your career?
Always. But you have to be flexible too, or you might miss something. Like I was never going to turn down that State Library of Queensland opportunity because that's huge. So I was really happy to cut some other opportunities that I could cut so that I could make time for that. So you've got to have goals, but you've got to be, flexible and responsive to what turns up in front of you unexpectedly.
Exactly. And it's such an important thing to share with artists that helps you move your career forward, is understanding that not every opportunity is for you. For one, it's not.
That's a hard lesson to learn, though. Because
massive hard lesson.
We're taught that we should be grateful for exposure, or we're taught that we should be grateful for any opportunity because the arts are hard, but you won't get ahead if you're not strategic. You really got to protect that time and energy. It's your single greatest gift.
I'm so, it just like buoys me to hear you express that so clearly. Because one of the things that we struggle with as artists, and we talked about it earlier, in that you can take a real mental hit when you fail at something as an artist, because it's such a personal practice. And one of the great things about strategizing and understanding your practice so intently, where you want to go and the things that are going to serve you to get there, is that you're minimising your chance of failure, for one, which when you minimise that chance of failure, then you start to protect your mental health and your financial resources and all those kinds of things. But I'm also a big advocate is if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So by like being really, really clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve, when the opportunities come your way, you get that opportunity to really filter it out and go, yeah, am I doing this or am I not doing this? And where does it sit with where I'm really headed? So I really do appreciate the way that you put that, given that perspective, because it's a hard thing to say to artists. Yeah, I see that that's come your way and I can, yeah, it looks amazing, but they want landscapes and you paint portraits. Do you really think it's going to fit, A, for your artwork, and B, for your mental health and your practice to do that? So it's a really interesting thing to dig into. Now, speaking of landscapes, you come from a really incredible neck of the woods that we're talking about, and there's big, wide areas up there to get involved in. But you like to, the works that we've seen in your exhibition were around Queensland, the good old Queensland homes with their backyards. And tell us a little bit about how Rockhampton inspires you that way. What do you love about the area, and why did that become a story you wanted to tell?
I think what I love about the area is what it means to me. Like, I love it because I live here. I grew up here. I was born in Rocky. I grew up on a cattle property west of Jeringa, which is on Gungaloo and Wodja country. And then I had to move into Rocky for high school because there was no other, we were too far away from everything, and I had to board here. So there's that kind of 5 years where you're in high school, where you're experiencing Central Queensland, but particularly Rocky as a teenager. And then I moved away to do my art degree and to work and do other things in Brisbane for roughly 6 or 7 years. And then I came back to Rocky as an adult. And it's amazing how that time away and then returning, it just was it was like coming back to a different place. And it was great because it had all of these memories associated with it that I'd established during my teenage years going to school here, and very close links to family. My father's family are predominantly from out Jeringa way, out west that way, but my mother's family are from Rockhampton. So, my nana still lives here. I lived with my nana for a few years. That's a big kind of thing that underpins a lot of my work. So I think what I love about this area in terms of my practice is just my connection to it. And that's kind of like what I was saying at the very start when I introduced myself, that I'm looking at place through an autobiographical lens. But I think place is a good, it's kind of like I don't know whether this is the right word, but maybe democratizing or accessible, in that regardless of your perspective, migrant, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, you've got some kind of connection to place, even if the kind of the epistemological framework through which you think of place differs. And so it's kind of like it automatically allows people to plug into my work regardless of what background they're approaching it from. If they're from Rockhampton, they can relate to something in the work. So it's been probably a really important device for getting my work out there in the early years of my career. And it's, I don't know, I just think there's nowhere else like it. And I think fresh eyes on the place, there's nothing else like that either. And I think too, I mentioned William Robinson before. In that book, he says, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along the lines of, because he didn't start making work until quite late, stereotypically compared to other artists, middle-aged. He was a teacher for decades. And he said, in retrospect, looking back on that there's no way that he could have started making art sooner, because he needed to go and get a life and get life experience first. And I think that's probably what has allowed me to make work about Rocky too, is embedding myself within various communities, the educational community, the arts community, my family, my friends, my colleagues. And then that has unlocked subject matter for me. So I really had to go and get a life, get a job, embed myself in communities in order to get access to subject matter and content for my practice. Yeah,
I think that's such an important point too, and that when art that you stand in front of and you can really feel energy. Like, I'm a big advocate of standing in front of artwork. The internet's great. I love seeing all the artwork come through, but standing in front of an artwork is a whole different experience. And I feel like there's an energy exchange that happens when you can engage with something. And I'm always find myself much more engaged with artwork when I hear a story like that, that goes, I've lived in this place. This is still where my nana lives. This is, you know, I have all this beautiful emotional connection to the place. And it really translates when you start to put that together versus just going, I'm going to dig for an image on the internet and see what I find, and then I'm going to copy it. When you start to tell those real stories, it really translates in your work. And I guess that's where we start to put ourselves more at risk as artists too. Like, it's the most vulnerable place we can be. So how do you feel about that journey when you're starting to, you put a very emotional story on the wall that you're super connected to? How does it feel when you then put it up on the wall and people start to interact with it? And you might get a negative, you might get a positive comment, you'll have lots of reactions. But what is the experience for you when you create a piece of work with all of that emotional connection, and then you can put it on a wall and people are interacting? Is that part of the addiction of creating your art?
Yeah, I think it's pivotal. I think it's like the work's not finished unless somebody's seen it. You know, that's when the work is finished, when somebody's seen it. And if somebody is generous enough to take the time to tell you something about their interaction with that artwork, that's like just the icing on the cake. It's such a gift for somebody to go to that because it's really easy to stand in front of an artwork and then you don't have to take the time to get back to the artist. But I have like distinct memories of all of the messages that people have taken the time to write me through social media, or it might be through like a visitor's book at the gallery or something like that, or it could just be running into me on the street or something, where they've taken the time to share their own sort of personal memory or anecdote that the work has triggered. And that, I think, is, I don't know, there's no other feeling like it. It's amazing to reach the connection with somebody else where the artwork and what went into the artwork is the medium for that connection. It's really fulfilling. It's beautiful.
It is. And I think there's something that I love to share sort of beyond our little art community, because we know what that feeling is like as an artist when you put something there and somebody connects. But to let those people who are connecting with us know how much it means, to go, you know, like the journey to getting the artwork on the wall is such a massive one for us. And people might say to you, how long did it take to paint that picture? And you might go, oh, it took a couple of hours. But in reality, it's taken you your whole life to put together the process of, I learned how to draw, I've learned how to paint, I've learned how to tell a story, I've found the confidence to approach my gallery, I've got this picture up on the wall. That journey to get the picture on the wall is so much more than just the time it took to create it. So I think, and like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that's part of why when somebody talks to you back about your artwork is why it's such a reward. Would you agree? It's not just I created this bit, it's the whole journey.
Yeah, it's validation for that work, but also for your decision to abandon all sensible reasoning and become an artist. You know, we were talking earlier about how hard it is to kind of make that choice to be an artist, and then to have the confidence to call yourself an artist. That's a hurdle I had to clear. That's hard, to have the guts to say, yes, I'm an artist, and then be ready for the questions, all sorts of questions that people will ask you because they have these preconceived notions of what it is to be an artist.
Yeah, mystery, isn't it, for some people? Yeah.
No, I think it's fundamentally important, and it's just so rewarding when you get that feedback, and it's validation that you've made the right choice. But equally, if you get feedback that doesn't validate that, and I've had personal experience of this, because the more you, as you correctly identified, the more you put yourself out there, the more vulnerable you become. Yeah. And also I've noticed too that as you start to receive awards and things like that, you can, it's that tall poppy thing in Australia, you can inadvertently become the object of some people's ire, even if you didn't ask for it. And so you have to be really careful to protect yourself from the negative self-talk that can be a response to that interaction with somebody where they didn't like your work. It's totally fine for people not to like your work. I think you've got to accept that that's a possibility. And you've kind of got to accept that if you're going to put stuff out there, that people are going to like it, and that's wonderful, but they're entitled not to like it as well. So that's that's really hard. That's been a steep learning curve, but I have had to kind of develop ways of thinking about negative. I would just call it criticism, not so much negative feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, this is the kind of goal that I was hoping we'd get to with this, because there is that thing that happens, and like we said, it's such a journey to get your pictures up on the wall, and nobody really talks to you in art school about what it feels like to put an exhibition on and hear something negative about your work. We're talking about how to make it, and we might talk about how to frame it, we might talk about how to get a grant, but who's talking about the emotional journey that comes with it, and the grit that you need to stand up with your exhibition and listen to somebody bag it, and even if inside of you go, I know that it's good, I know that I've given it all, there's nothing else I would have done differently, and to teach yourself the kind of dialogue that it needs to stand with that body of work and listen to somebody take you down. And it might not even be, like you identified, it might not even be about the work. It might just be that you've achieved something and they're feeling like somehow it makes them less than, and then it's directed at you because you've risen up. I know for me that my way of getting through it is I set my own bar for success. So it's like, success for me isn't if I sell 50 pieces in a show or all those kinds of things. So my bar for success is, can you get the show together? Did you tell your story? Have you given it all you could give? Is there anything you do differently? And so if I can answer those questions, yes, for myself, then it's beautiful to receive compliments. It's tough to receive criticism, but you can put it all in a bag and shake it down and go, actually, I'm still okay with what I did. Can you verbalize a process like that, or is it just something that happens as a process? Grit just exists because you've been in the process, but you don't actually step it out like that?
I don't think I can really elaborate on that, because that was like a perfect answer. Everything you just said resonates with me.
Yep.
And that is what you said about going back to what your definition of success is. That would have been my answer to this question. I especially, and it relates to, it helps me when I lose motivation, because it's like I'm in it for the long game. So my core goal for my practice is sustainability.
Yeah,
that's literally it. So it's one word, core goal for my practice, because the most important thing to me is, do I have the time and energy and the well-being to make the work? So if I have those things, that's my success. And it's long-term sustainability. It's like my mum has been practicing for decades, and she just gets better and better and has more mastery over her craft and her art, and it's incredible. So it's long-term sustainability. And I think you've got to accept that if you're going to have a long career, there's going to be those moments when you do receive that sort of feedback or interpretation of your work. And so I think because the goal for me is long-term sustainability, and that's got nothing to do with external validation. It's got only to do with, am I doing the best that I can to get that time and energy and space and well-being to make the work? It kind of is irrelevant. Like, other people's assessment of the work is almost irrelevant. Like, it's a bonus if they like the work, and I'm not going to downplay it, because I am as acutely sensitive to those sorts of comments as anybody else, but I am really strategic in how I choose not to share those things publicly on social media and things like that. Like, that's really important to me, that you present only a positive face, because you're on display always as an artist. If a curator is watching you, if a writer is observing you, a critic or whatever, like your behavior is public always. So I choose not to push those things out into public, but it really hurts. I'm not going to lie. And there's moments when you've just got to turn to your partner. My partner and my siblings, they're kind of my sounding boards, my kind of little team, my people around me or whatever, where you've got to turn to them and go, that really hurt my feelings, what do I do now? And get some wisdom, write it down. I write in a journal every night. It's not like a fluffy light thing. It's just so I can download the thoughts on the day and then sleep. It's not a positivity journal or anything like that. It's literally just I taught history in period 3, and I walked the dog, and I planted some flowers to salve. I might get in the studio tomorrow, that's it. But I find that's really important for me to be able to cope with stuff like that, is writing things down, talking to other people, and then always going back to the core motivation in your practice, which for me is sustainability, which has nothing to do with external validation or otherwise of my work.
Yeah, I just think that it's such gold to hear you speak about that in those terms, and you know, to take the emotion, which I agree with you, you can't downplay it. It hurts.
It hurts.
When you get that negative response to what you're doing, and to be able to, I agree wholeheartedly, to have your close network of people so you can vocalize it, because if you sit and internalize that, you would never make art again. But to be able to have a close network of people, to be able to go, hey, I really gave that my all, and to hear that person say that thing like, oh, I'm really hurting on the inside, I just need to drop this somewhere so I can find my place of balance again. That's such an important practice, to go, yeah, I'm going to get this from the inside to the outside so I can pick up a paintbrush again. Otherwise I wouldn't. It does hurt, but if you can't learn some kind of system as an artist to deal with that place of, you know, my emotions are hurting me right now on such a private practice that's so public, how am I going to break this part of the journey down? If you haven't got a process, you will not have sustainability, is what I would predict. It's enough to stop you making art sometimes.
And I think that's what really the definition of resilience is too. It's you hit an obstacle, so you find a way to get back up. And it's not that hitting the obstacle doesn't hurt, it's that you make the choice to process it and do whatever you've got to do to be able to come back to your core thing. You've just got to keep getting up. And the other thing that I do too that I forgot to mention is all those books that I read where I'm trying to find a model for, you know, an artistic exemplar that I want to imitate. They all are littered with stories of failure and rejection and, you know, hurtful, you know, critical reviews and stuff like that. And so it's like, you're not alone, and it's good to know that you're not alone. And it's good to know that people at the very top of our field still experience those feelings of self-doubt and still have to struggle with a bad review in the papers or whatever. So yeah, I think, like we said, debriefing with other people, but also reading about how people who are really successful have dealt with it can be a really good way to get your own strategies too.
Yeah. It's fantastic advice, and it's definitely, I feel like our processes are very similar. I too read lots of stories, like I'm a big reader as well, and the amount of stories you read about successful people and how they've failed, and that even in their success they're still failing, but what they have that's different to people who fail and stop is perspective. And they can sit and go, how does this version of failure sit in the grand scheme of what I'm doing, and then still how important is that goal to me to keep going? And you'll read about it time and time and time and time again, is that they've failed probably more times than they've succeeded, but they've had some kind of capacity with their resilience and mental fortitude to know what to do with that feeling of failure, and how to move it forward. And for us, it's not just I tried to climb that rock wall and I fell down. It's like I'm putting my heart and soul on display, and somebody tells me that's not worthy. That's very personal stuff to have to manage. And I think as artists, the more that we talk about this with each other and go, yeah, I've been there too, it sucks, but this is how I got through it. I think that, you know, we start to offer resilience to more people and hopefully keep more artists creating their fabulous exhibitions, which is what we want to see. So moving forward for you, have you got any projects on the go that you're happy to share, or are they a little bit secret at the moment? What are you working on for now?
I've got some things I can share. So I'm working on a solo exhibition that's due to be held, you know, all things COVID permitting, at Queensland College of Arts Project Gallery in January in 2021.
Fantastic. That's a great venue.
Yeah, and it's really nice to be showing work at my old art school. That's where I did my Bachelor of Fine Art, so it's lovely to be, you know, away for nearly a decade and then going back there now and being able to reconnect with old peers and lecturers and things like that. I'm really looking forward to that particular experience.
Yeah.
Sometime in the next few weeks, I would have been pre-COVID departing for China to do a 6-week artist residency that was part of winning the Baton Award in 2019. So that's kind of a little bit of a disappointment that you've got to sort of just think about and go, maybe in future we'll be flexible about it. So I would like to do some kind of residency in the next 12 months, again, COVID permitting, that just buys you that time without distraction. And in the grand scheme of things, it's a long way down the track, but I'm preparing for my exhibition that's being held at Rockhampton Art Gallery, which will be the Rockhampton Museum of Art. The new
Is this going to be in the new building?
Yeah, which is the other outcome, apart from the residency, the other outcome of winning the Baton Award in 2019. So sounds like it's a long way away, but I learned very quickly the hard way last time when I was doing my exhibition at Rocky Art Gallery that you should halve the available time that you think you have, because everything takes so much longer than you think it will, especially when you're working with an institution where things must be finished by hard deadlines. There is no wiggle room. The wiggle room is your sleep or whatever. You just cannot extend that. So you've got to be so organised and prepared.
It's
and that's
such a truth, isn't it? When you get to that level of exhibition, you really do have to be looking at it as a serious job. It's not just
it's a profession.
They want you to do writing, you need to be pricing, you need to be framing, and they need it when they need it. And this is where it's really sorting the chaff from the wheat, isn't it? It's like when you work with an institution like that, and particularly moving into this new building, which is going to be super exciting, is they're lifting the level again. Is the professionalism that you have to, and you mentioned that before, is that people are watching. They're watching whether you deliver your work on time. They're watching whether it's framed, whether you can write about your art. Will you show up and do a workshop? It's all on display.
Yep, all the time, all of it. You've got to be quite careful about that. So that hopefully will give me a really great exhibition that would be able to tour. So I know that seems early as well, but for 2023, 2024, I'm looking now at the end of 2020, because institutions program years in advance. That's just the nature of, being in an art institution, you've got to lock that stuff down years in advance. So that's sort of one of my goals for the next 6 months. The first 6 months of next year is look at touring options and start to apply for things and lock things in. So that's kind of an example of that big macro architectural plan for my career process there. I've kind of got the next 5 years stitched up, and then sometime in the next 5 years I would really like to go and do further postgraduate study in fine arts. That would probably be, we'll see how it goes, probably be in one of the southern capitals, because I would like to go and extend my network, and I think that will be like a reinvigorating experience. Like you spend 5, 6, 7 years here where I am now, you build your skills, you try and attain, we're working towards mastery of your craft, and then you go and get a fresh experience that will challenge and stimulate you and push you up to the next level in your career. So and then that leaves room too, though, over the next few years to kind of take advantage of small opportunities that pop up unexpectedly on that smaller sort of rhythm of time and stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love hearing that strategy, and it's such a beautiful example to share with people how you can go, this is my career, this is how it plays out, this is the big picture, this is the opportunities you can put in the middle. You run this thing like you'd run a corporation as a solo operator. It's really,
that has come from being a teacher. I was very prone to procrastination before being a teacher, and I had been in the very fortunate position where I could kind of coast on my coattails through art school without, it's probably that early notion of talent. I just didn't have to try that hard. I mean, I worked really hard. I don't want to downplay that aspect of it, but organisation and stuff like that was really not my forte in my art degree, and it's been a real slog to find the discipline to be as organised as I am now over years. It didn't happen as soon as I finished art school. I had to go and, learn how to study at a postgraduate level, which is an overwhelming, jump in expectation of what you're going to do in what kind of time frame. And then I had to learn how to do 7 small assignments every day for the 7 lessons that I was going to teach the next day. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a constant onslaught, and you're either going to get crushed by the wheel or you're going to find a way to get on top of it. Sorry, I just had to learn through my teaching career how to be disciplined and organized. And now I've got systems in place that I know work for me, and I can get to places, you know, early, and I can get my deadlines done early. And that eliminates a whole bunch of other possibilities where things could go wrong or people could stand me up. So it's just kind of, I guess that's that professionalism. That's something you've got to work on as much as your craft.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. And it's those contingency plans, the A, B, C's and D's of it all. It is just such an important part of this career. And to anyone who's aspiring to follow you into the kind of career that you're having, and to hear that advice from you, that it's not that the time that you spend is not just making art, it's really working on this thing as if you were running a full-on organisation. It's
my full-time job. It's a full-time job.
It's massive, and that you prioritise then making time for your art on the times that you feel that creative flow really happening, and then in the down times you're working on the structure of it. I think is great advice for anyone who's looking to move into a career such as this one. You are such a delight and such an inspiration. And
thanks. It's lovely. Thank you.
We've come to the end of our hour, but thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to me. Since the day I met you, you just stood out to me as someone to be inspired by, and that continues to this day. And wish you every success with everything that you're working on. And I'll be watching intently every little achievement, or massive achievement, little achievement. Who am I kidding? Every achievement you have along the way.
Thank you, Susie. I would just like to take this time just briefly to quickly reiterate how impressive I think you've been in transforming and empowering your regional arts community down where you are, and that I think that you're also an inspiration for people to look up to and say, where could this career in the creative arts take me? You know, you've done this amazing job of energizing what you've already got down there, and I think that's really admirable. So thank you for what you're doing as well.
Oh, thank you, Erin. And here's the goal of all this, is that we all rise together, and here's cheers to the amazing creative community. Thank you, lovely. So we'll put the links over to your beautiful art so people can see what you're up to, and we'll keep an eye on what you're doing, and all the best for your fabulous projects. And I hope we get to chat again soon.
That'll be awesome. Thank you. That would be so good. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. That was so fun. I loved talking to you.
Me too. Thank you, lovely.
All right. We'll speak soon.
Will do. See you, Del.
Bye, Susie.
Bye.